If you hand somebody a can of gasoline so they can put gas in their car and they take that gasoline and go burn a forest down, is it your fault because you gave them the gasoline? What's up, brothers and sisters? Thanks for joining me today. We are discussing Paul's vision. He has 3 accounts in the book of Acts regarding his vision seeing the Messiah. Now, there's people that are a part of the anti-Pauline or anti-New Testament camp, which I call the camp of Korah, since they're like, we don't need this guy. There's people out there who say that Paul contradicts himself, that he's a liar, he's a false apostle. Don't believe him. Don't listen to his words. So, is this true? Is Paul lying? Paul was on the road to Damascus. And he sees a vision of the Messiah. And it's recorded in Acts chapter 9 that in this vision, Paul with his companions, they saw a light and heard a voice. And then in chapter 22, it says that they heard no voice. So on the surface, this seems like a contradiction. But is it? Let's look at this further. So here's the record right here. We're talking about Acts chapter 9, verse 7 in the King James. And the men which journeyed with him and stood speechless, hearing a voice, but seeing no man. Acts 22:9. And they that were with me saw indeed the light and were afraid, but they heard not the voice. So we see in chapter 9, verse 7, it says that they were hearing a voice. And then in chapter 22, it says they heard not a voice. So this is actually a translation and interpretation issue. There are just a couple points that we need to understand about this record. And one is that it's a vision, and that in Acts chapter 9, it's understood that Luke wrote the book of Acts. In Acts chapter 9, it's Luke who's telling the story, and then Acts 22, it's Paul who is telling the story. So Paul's having this vision. He's seeing the light, they're hearing a voice, but he's the one that's actually comprehending what's taking place. So he's having a vision, and then the second point is anytime somebody tells a story of an event, they may add to or they may not include certain points of information. They may embellish their story, they may change their story, or they just may decide not to tell certain things too. So we need to understand that this is very common actually within the Bible, right? You always have multiple records of different events taking place, and sometimes there's more information in each one, like the 4 Gospels or Kings and Chronicles and Exodus and Numbers, stuff like that. So not everything's always going to line up necessarily the same, and really it comes down in this instance is translational issues. So we're going to look at this. We're going to look at the Greek a little bit here in Acts chapter 9 verse 7. Right here where it says hearing. So that is in the Greek word. It's in the present tense, right? So in chapter 9, Luke, he's giving his account, right? He's giving his account, and then in chapter 22, Paul gives his account. So we have Luke's account, Luke's version of it, and then we have Paul's version of it. And also Paul gives another testimony in Acts 26. And you take these 3 records, you put them all together, it helps us get context, a story of what's taking place. So Acts 9:7, here the Greek word for hearing is in the present tense. So they're hearing a voice. The men journeyed, stood speechless, hearing a voice. But in Acts 22:9, it says they heard not a voice. So in chapter 9, verse 7, the word hearing is in the present tense, right? So it's like they're hearing a voice. But if you look at chapter 22, verse 9, the word heard is in the aorist tense. So that means it's kind of like in the past tense. So they heard not the voice speaking with him. So when the vision first happened, they were hearing a voice. They were present in the present tense, but Paul indicates that they heard not, in the past tense, the whole of the message that the voice was speaking. In the Greek word here, if you look at the word spake, here in the King James, the word spake is rooted in the word laleo, which is connected to where we get the word language from. So it's to utter or to speak, laleo. So this should be understood as they heard the voice, but they did not understand what they were saying. They didn't understand what he was saying to Paul. So why didn't they understand? Well, it's likely because the Messiah was speaking Hebrew and they didn't understand Hebrew. Some of his captains, maybe some of his, maybe he had some soldiers, some guards with him, and they didn't speak Hebrew. And we see this indicated in chapter 26, verse 14, when he's giving an account. He says, "And when we were all had fallen to the earth, I heard a voice speaking," that's the root of laleo, "unto me, and saying in the Hebrew tongue, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? It is hard for thee to kick against the pricks." And we see also in chapter 22 where it mentions he was speaking Hebrew. And the ESV actually puts this in a pretty good, decent translation. It says, "Now those who were with me saw the light, but did not understand the voice of the one who was speaking with me." So the ESV gets the translation right. When Paul recounts his story in Acts chapter 22, the listeners were taken back that he spoke Hebrew. If you go actually starting in chapter 21, verse 40, "And when he had given them license, Paul stood on the stairs and beckoned with the hand unto the people. And when there was made a great silence, he spake unto them in the Hebrew tongue, saying," and then chapter 22, verse 2, "And when they heard that he was addressing them in the Hebrew language, they became even more quiet." Verse 9, "Now these who were with me saw the light, but did not understand the Hebrew voice of the one who was speaking to me." So many people in the Korah camp like to accuse Paul of removing the law. They blame him, the person who supplied the fuel, so to speak, and he hands the fuel over, and all these pastors start forest fires with their not understanding Hebrew language, Greek language, Hebrew thought, not reading things in context. So are we blaming Paul, or should we be blaming the pastors who are twisting these things? It's not Paul's fault. He writes something, Luke writes something, any of the biblical authors write something. If somebody takes something that's good and turns it into evil for evil purposes, it doesn't mean the thing that was good is now evil. It just means that someone took something good and made something evil out of it, and they twisted it. But those in the Korah camp, they accuse Paul of removing the law. So I think it's these ill-informed pastors that are just don't have comprehension of the law. If you keep reading in Acts 26, he adds more detail about his vision, and the picture starts to come together for us. So let's look at Acts chapter 26. Paul adds more detail to his vision. He says, "And when we were all fallen to the earth, I heard a voice speaking unto me, saying in the Hebrew tongue, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? It is hard for you to kick against the pricks. And I said, Who are you, Adonai? And he said unto me, I am Yahusha, whom you persecute. But rise and stand upon your feet, for I have appeared unto you for this purpose, to make you a minister and a witness, both of these things which you have seen, and of those things in which I will appear to you, delivering you from the people and from the other nations, unto whom now I send you, to open their eyes, and to turn them from darkness to light, and from the power of Satan unto Elohim, that they may receive forgiveness of sins and inheritance among them that are sanctified by faith that is in me. Therefore, O King Agrippa, I was not disobedient to the heavenly vision, but showed first unto them of Damascus and at Jerusalem, and throughout all the coast of Yehud, and then to the other nations, that they should repent and turn to Elohim and do works meet for repentance. So right there, Paul, he didn't lie. He just explained it different. The accusation actually belongs to the unlearned, The unlearned are the ones who are lying, who are misrepresenting Paul and his letters. They're the ones with the gasoline in the forest about to start fires. He never canceled or taught against the law. He always taught that the nations should be obedient to the Torah. Romans 6:16. Do you not know that if you present yourselves to anyone as obedient slaves, you are slaves of the one to whom you obey, either sin, which leads to death, or of obedience, which leads to righteousness? Paul's very clear that the law of sin and death is done away with when you are no longer sinning, when you are no longer disobedient to the Torah, to the commands, when you follow the Father's instructions and you don't go about your own way to make a plan of salvation, your own laws, your own rules. That's what Israel did. They went about to make their own way of doing things. Sure, they had aspects of the law and their traditions and religions and stuff like that, but their heart was not in it. Their hearts were not circumcised. They were not following the commandments, and the Messiah rebuked them for it. The Messiah rebuked the Torah, the supposed Torah keepers, but they weren't really, they kept it, but they didn't implement it. That's why he told his disciples to listen to those who sit in Moses' seat, because they read the words of Moses, but don't behave like them. Don't act like them, right? Don't be hypocrites. Romans 16:26. But now is made manifest, and by the scriptures of the prophets, according to the commandment of the everlasting Elohim, made known to all nations, for what? For the obedience of faith. So according to the scriptures of the prophets, he's talking about prophets of old, including Moses, according to the commandment of Elohim, which the commandment was given to Moses to give to the nations as a mediator, he says it's for all nations, for the obedience of faith. So Paul did not do away with the law. That's just another translation and interpretation issue. Even back in Paul's day, he was being accused of removing the law. There were many people who were falsely making accusations about him and his interactions with those of the nations. They had their man-made oral traditions that they kept and prevented people, from participating in the things of Yahuwah. And so Paul was very adversarial to those people, and those people still continue to this day to spread lies about Paul and his letter. Our interpretations, our translations are given to us through biased scribes who have a certain agenda. Maybe sometimes it's by incident, or maybe it's on purpose. Tough to tell sometimes, but either way, once we look at the Greek and we understand the whole context of what's taking place, the whole thing fits better like a hand in a glove. So I hope this bless you. If you have any questions, you have any debates or arguments about Paul, let me know. I'll hear them out. Sure love you. Shalom.